Good morning, folks. Welcome to Season 3 of Opening Doors, the ONPHA podcast. I'm excited to do it in this format every year with some good friends of mine here. Stéphane Giguère, Sean Baird, respectively, the CEO of Toronto Community Housing and Ottawa Community Housing. I've known these guys for a while. I know Sean a little bit less than I've known Stéphane. And I had this concept of this podcast a little while ago, actually a couple years ago, when COVID was happening and people were sitting here in a housing crisis thinking about, what's the solution? What's the solve? And you had a lot of people out here thinking it's all about build, supply. And I was like, you know what? You could build every car in the world to be a G-Wagon, and you'd have a lot of people walking to work because we all can't afford those cars, right? So you have to have right supply for the right people. And I know because of my upbringing and my lifestyle that community housing has everything in the nutshell. So when you're thinking about some of the more dire things within our society around high need supports, critical supports, social housing programs. When I think about social housing programs, that's just people who need that offset to get by and to live their life and to make sure that they can take care of their families. And then there's that nugget within the social housing space around just affordability. And we are, by mandate mission and what we do, we're always going to be the most affordable. And when I think about, my kids, who I don't want living in my basement until they're 45, they want good, safe, sound places to live. And when I think about where I might want to send them, maybe if they land in Ottawa, I'll send them to you. If they end up staying in Toronto, I'll love to send them to somewhere in their portfolio. And I know that our portfolios have had an interesting rap over a long time, but I want to talk about this part of our future going forward because it's our moment. So without further ado, though, let me hand it over to my colleagues to do a little brief introduction of themselves, and we'll get back into the conversation because you should have seen our prep meeting for this podcast. Like, it was literally, we could have recorded it and released it, but we decided to do it live. So, Sean, I'll start with you. Just a brief introduction.
Yeah, so I'm Sean Baird. I'm the President and CEO at Toronto Community Housing Corporation, the largest provider of affordable housing in the entire country. I'm very proud of the work that we do to provide affordable housing, community housing for so many people all across the city of Toronto. We're in every single neighborhood that you can possibly think of, supporting about 110,000 different tenants across the city. I'm a little new to ONPHA and to the sector. I've been in the role about a year and a half, but heavily engaged in community service and social services for a decade or more.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Stéphane.
Yes, Stéphane Giguère, Ottawa Community Housing. Really proud to be here. Representing about 33,000 residents at Ottawa Community Housing. Really making a point of, putting on the front burner innovation in everything that we do. And just a couple of weeks ago, we were announcing a new initiative called Bumblebee, where we bring supportive housing agencies working with Ottawa Community Housing, enabling their capacity in delivering programs. And for us, delivering the capital side to enable the build that they need and required. So for us, it's really in a sector looking at those opportunities. And you said it right. And Sean, you mentioned about being in the role for about 10 years. But what I've seen is evolution of our sector. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to recognize from where we were to where we are, looking at the momentum, Build Canada Home that we saw this morning and other groups. It's important to recognize that the momentum is there, the timing is now, and we need to deploy, we need to build, and we need to fix what we own. Yeah. Because we have a lot of also older assets, and it's important that we maintain and that we support our residents.
Yeah, and it's a good starting point for the conversation because I do believe, and this is why I wanted to have the conversation, is you guys represent large providers that have capacity for size and scale. We're a growth sector, and I don't think we've ever been recognized or thought of in that way. When I think about I think of things in little arcs like the Marvel movies, right? So we're at the end of the first arc, which is the last 30 years of funding and closing the gap through the government. But now we're in this place where, like what Marlene just said about 20 minutes ago, we're sitting on $38 billion of assets, right? So what could we do by unlocking those things and really positioning ourselves as a growth sector? So Sean, what are your thoughts on us being a growth sector versus somebody that, something that people would think are always looking for the handout?
I think what a privilege to be at a point where this is what's happening in the sector, right? And it's not, you mentioned Build Canada Homes, you mentioned the capacity that we have for change, and that's all true. But the reality is the big economy around us has totally changed, right? Yep. And so access to housing and the reality of what housing looks like for the average Canadian is dramatically different today than it was 10, 20 years ago, right? And so regardless of what path we follow, that change has already happening, and those changes are rippling through the way community housing operates, the way the private market housing operates. And so we need to keep up with that change. Right. And I believe strongly that growth is very important. You know, when I was at ONPHA last year, it was a little bit, I don't know, what's the word? It was dramatic to say that the community housing sector should double in size. Mm-hmm. Now it's on logos. Now people have pins that say, like, I see that, like this, yeah. You know, it's spoken into being, right? It's now manifested that people believe in the system that, yeah, the community housing sector should be double the size of what it is, right? And I think that's fairly accepted mantra right now. And so my feeling is, if we're going to keep up with what's happening in the economy, absolutely we have to grow. And we can't lose sight of the opportunities to really do things dramatically better and fix some of the sins of the past while we grow. Because there'll be never another time like this, and probably in my generation. No,
and none of ours, right? So Stéphane, let's jump on that sins of the past bit, because you've been here for a while. And how do we not...
Both pretty good at that.
How do we not duplicate how do we not fall back into a trap? Because what I worry about is we're sexy for now. And it's like one of those things, because there's a crisis. And, you know, I found so many new friends in sectors that I didn't even imagine cared about what we do. And all of a sudden it's like, hell, hey, I want to come to your conference and want to talk about it. I'm like, great, fantastic. How do we tie into that and not repeat some of the errors?
There are some errors in the past for sure, but in all sectors, it's not just typical of housing. We saw that in healthcare. We saw that even in the private sector and in the for-profit as well. They're learning. And one aspect that what we can learn as a sector is really to look at also our demand, our demographics. The clients that we're serving are not the same that they were 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and even 5 years ago. The prevalence of mental health and addiction post-COVID is quite significant. And as a sector, working together, many conferences lately are about partnership, working together, about encouraging cooperation, collaboration. We need to do it. We have to stop saying it. We have to do it. And that's the big difference that, from the past. We need to change gear. For whoever had that bicycle with only one gear and you move to the 10 gear, 20 gear bicycle, there's always that moment that your chain goes off and you start over again. And that's important to recognize that now our sector is more sophisticated. We have 10 gears, we have 20 gears because we do complex financing. And in the room at ONPHA, you're seeing a lot of capacity. You have people coming from all walk of life, from lived experience in housing to being engineer, accountant, politicians, and all helping out to try to solve that. How we bring that capacity forward and the momentum that you mentioned, it's important also that we seize it and that we avoid deflating also as a sector, because it might be delayed. It might take time. But real estate was not built like Rome was not built in 1 year. It takes a couple of years to build planned property, to look at the solution. And the build itself is one dimension, but the second dimension, it's about people. And our sector is very good to deal with the complexity of the residents that we house. But it's important also to recognize that the complexity of building from mid-rise to a townhouse to a high-rise, it demands a lot of time and coordination and partnership. But like I said, we have to do it.
Yeah. So I think that's very important when it comes down to that, the demographic. And I looked at the like some of the housing plans that were outlined by the province, for example. I think it was like 99,000 homes or something like that, or whatever the number was. And it immediately was the reason why I brought up that G-Wagon analogy. It's like, let's go build a bunch of, communities where they're not attached to people. They're not where people live. And then all of a sudden, let's just have these things sit there on the market, right? So Sean, you've come from not just the housing side. So maybe a little bit of your insight as to how do we do that pairing of, again, this is about seizing a moment. So we know demographics. How do we turn that into the assets that we're going to build in the future? Like, how do we turn that into a conversation where it's more about delivering the value proposition on an investment, right? So if you're going to pitch somebody, you got to be able to pitch as expert. So talk to me a little bit about your past life and how you're parlaying that into some of what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I worked for quite a bit of time leading up community social services functions across the GTA, and it's a good opportunity to dive deeper into something Stéphane said about the demographics that you were touching on. There's really unique changes happening within our communities, right? I feel, and I say this regularly, that as organizations, we're stuck in this, we're squeezed in this interesting position where the level of acuity amongst our tenants, amongst visitors to our buildings, amongst our broader communities has grown rapidly, right? Certainly post-COVID, but even before that, right? And so and you can blame that on income inequality, you can blame that on rising levels of addictions, lack of supports. I mean, all those things are true simultaneously. And I think that, we really need to identify the fact that those growing levels of acuity are there, and we, as often the housing provider of last resort, or even the social service provider of last resort, end up stuck with some of those challenges without being fully equipped to deal with them. So that's one side of the spectrum. But simultaneously, on the other side of the spectrum, you've got this growing level of affordability crisis in the market that is driving more middle-income earners into seeking alternative housing opportunities like community housing. And there are other jurisdictions around the world where it is completely normal and typical that organizations like ours, Ottawa Community Housing, Toronto Community Housing, would be typical workforce housing providers, for example, for a much larger portion of the population, or serving. We often used to say, well, we serve the lowest 20% of income earners, but now the reality is it's like the lowest 50% of income earners that could theoretically qualify for the products that we supply, right? But there's nowhere near enough supply to do all that. So I feel like we're always stuck between those two demographic challenges: this ballooning growth on the middle income side that we can't meet from a supply perspective, and this rising acuity at the lowest income side, where we don't have the tools to provide the supports that are necessary to support people there.
Yeah, I remember sitting. I'll let you jump in, but I'll remind you of a conversation we actually, Stéphane and I, we whenever he's in town, he'll make a point to say hi, and when I'm up there, I'll make a point to say hi. We sat here quickly for maybe a 45-minute just quick hello, and we went over the notion of landlord plus. Remember that landlord plus conversation, because that was a special term that people, at least in the city of Toronto, and I'm sure in Ottawa, were using for us as providers. We were landlord plus. And I sat down and I said, well, what are the pluses? What are they adding? How are they helping, right? And it was really landlord less. It was minus, and we were doing everything. The real plus was the people within the organization doing more. So let you get to your point, but it's that whole notion of we are absolutely always going to be more than landlords, right? We understand demographics. And so if you're thinking about the solve to the crisis, like if you're putting a Lego together, the pieces will fit because we know what's out there and who needs what. So your thoughts?
Yeah, no, and I like where it's going, because when you think about other systems, even healthcare, they will talk about housing as a health determinant. And in fact, now you're seeing hospitals building housing because they understand that there's emergency right now, from homelessness to supportive to affordable housing. And in that continuum, the way that we're going at the pace we're going, it's not fast enough. And that's why we need to act rapidly. Because when you see other systems trying to step in, first and foremost, it's great what they're doing, no doubt, but it's not their business. They are, and they will tell you. So if you meet with the CEOs of the hospitals, St. Michael's here in Toronto or in Ottawa, the Ottawa hospitals, they want to make sure that they deploy and make sure that their patients can be released in the community with the proper level of supports. In absence of that, now they start believing that maybe they need to build. And if we are in an emergency, we have to stop begging for dollars and deploying those dollars. It's not normal that we have to go to multiple layers of approval on all fronts, with any type of authorities, federal, municipal, provincial, and not being able to deploy within, at least 36 months, 24 to 36 months, those dollars. Even on the capital repair side, we face the same challenges. It takes time, a lot of time. And if we are in an emergency, and we all been into emergencies ourselves, or for ourselves, our families and siblings, you don't want to wait, 2-3 years at the door to say, okay, what could potentially be happening?
Can we fix this?
We have to change the gear set again to the sector and make sure that everyone really align and speed up to the pace that we need to deploy. And the trust and confidence in our sector is there. And back to our population that we're serving, and Sean raised it really well, the complexity and the equity of care required is way beyond housing now. Being a landlord plus is not only the ability to deliver services, but to partner with the right agencies that can deliver services on our behalf or in the communities. But the disengagement of many other sectors, unfortunately, for funding, restrictions, funding challenges in healthcare, long-term care, even in education, or in the also in the legal system. What we're seeing is people being early released from jail with conditions that they are not supported, and they moved into housing. The housing landlord plus is exactly about those situations. We're not equipped for that, for sure. Can we do better? Totally. Can we work better with other agencies? Absolutely. But again, that sense of urgency has to be there for everyone.
Yeah, and you
because when you go big picture on it, like, we're paying one way or the other, right? So
Exactly.
there's our system, but you compare that to the shelter system, to the healthcare system, to incarceration. Every one of those programs is 10 times the cost of our system, right?
Yeah.
So you can invest more in emergency response, or you can invest more in preventative. And look, it's always going to be a hard decision, right? How you balance those things. But right now, when you're in a moment of crisis, there's so much focus on the emergency response without necessarily, I would, from my point of view, enough understanding of the fact that that's a 10 times the investment to get probably a suboptimal outcome.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I hear, even when I was listening this morning, and these are all encouraging signs, like programmatic things like Build Canada Homes and everything else. I think there's been a lot of talk around things like supportive housing, like like the types of stuff they're talking about require the other versions of investment as well. So it's not like you can just build a place that is a supportive housing place. You now have to continue to fund the thing to make it all work. And that's why I say this sector's been super special, because I'm looking out in the crowd. I saw an old friend of mine who was an old CFO where I used to work, and I knew we were funding the agency on the housing dollar, right? So question to you both is, how do we market ourselves differently? I think we're getting close, but how do we market ourselves differently so that it's more of a complete solution? Because again, we were landlord plus, we were housing a last resort. So now it's like, how do we come to the table with a different agenda that is understood? Because I liked your point earlier, Sean, when we were talking about, or you see the pins, like 20% community housing, right? I actually said that to a politician, and he had a very negative reaction, because the immediate thought was, we're going to have 20% more of the hardest to manage people in society. And I'm like, no, I want 20% more of community housing. There's a sliver that's supportive, there's a sliver that's social with programs, and there's a sliver where, again, I want my kids out of my basement and soon.
So you just named...
Are they still in the basement?
You just named my greatest fear, right? Like, yeah. I one of the things that weighs very heavily on me as leader in this organization is, I don't want any politician or any funder or policymaker to point to Toronto Community Housing or Ottawa Community Housing and say, that's the reason we shouldn't invest more in this sort of thing. Because look what's going on over in that community or in that neighborhood, right? And I say that without trying to stigmatize or prejudice. The reality is, we have built what we have built, and we have created the communities that we've created, and now we need to invest in supporting and uplifting and changing some of those communities, right? So that's when I said earlier about seizing the moment of growth to fix some of the sins of the past, that's a huge part of what I was talking about. Yeah. We used to build 240 units, all bachelor suites, fill it with 100% RGI tenancies, and keep it, by the way, across a couple of roads from other neighborhoods, right? And say, hope for the best, right? Like, sure. And I say that tongue in cheek, but like, there's a bit to how that was done in the past, right? Look, we don't do that anymore. I look around the room and nobody does that anymore. It's not how we build social housing anymore. Right. But it doesn't change the fact that we still have buildings that look like that. We still have communities that suffer from some of those kinds of challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
So we got to invest in supporting those.
Yeah.
Right? So when you talk about partnerships, and you talk about, and I often talk about changing some of our tenancies, right, and rebalancing the mix within individual buildings, not just across the portfolio. Like those are meaningful ways to change the experience on the ground and what it's like to actually live in some of our communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you have to consider also that Canada is young. When you look at other countries, like you take Vienna or take the UK, a long tradition, standing tradition of nonprofit councils, 500 years in some cases, but they started back in the 30s mainly to push really after the war, community housing. But nonprofits were already existing years and years ago. And that sense of community support was already there, even in medieval times. We forget about that. But the reality is that notion of we're there for each other as a sector. And some have been better over the years. And like I mentioned earlier about Vienna, and there are other places like that we can turn to as a sector and aspire to. And back to your point about branding, when you look at and you consider branding, we have to keep it simple. When people are successful is when your messages resonate emotionally. Sean was on something here to say, listen, we don't want to replicate the past. We want to build a better future. And the future is also with a different type of population. We talk about mixed income. We talk about mixed cities in our communities. We talk about now engine of economic development and economic impact. When OCH, we're going out now and we're announcing a project, we talk about job creations. We talk about the economic impact that we have. Just for giving you a sense, we have about 2,000 units right now in the pipeline that we're advancing or building. Just the economic impact of that is about 10,000 jobs directly or indirectly in Ottawa. You talk about $1.5 billion of economic, meaning workers, trade workers going for lunch at Subway. Sorry to make some advertising here.
Yeah, no problem.
Or watching the Jays tonight. So, and that's the economic impact, right? You bring people and people moving in town. But one of the challenges that we're still facing as community housing builder and community building in that sense is the fact that a lot of our workers now are living further away from where the services has to be delivered. Our employees at OCH, you will hear that they will be living on the Quebec side or in an hour away from Ottawa, like in Pembroke or in Carleton Place or in the East End. That's also an element that we need to, back to scalability and act rapidly. The more we will be building, the faster we will be building, the less we will have of that spread and sprawl happening right now across the GTA, across Ottawa, and across Ontario right now. So.
Yeah, I think embracing our economic impact is critically important, right? So you touched on certainly on the transactions, right? They're massive, right? And they're happening in a time when private market housing development has taken such a dive, right?
Exactly.
So the reality is we work with constructors and development partners where we're helping them keep good crews on so that they can keep progressing and maintain that capacity for housing development within the city of Toronto. I'm sure the same is true in Ottawa. But there's also like a citywide, province-wide economic engine issue around. And you touched on it, if your housing isn't affordable, it just has a drag on the overall economic growth within 100%. A particular city, or especially in an urban environment, right? And there's a old joke about Toronto's an hour away from Toronto, right? And that's getting worse and worse and worse every year, right? And people can't really drive until they can afford to buy a house anymore. All of that is changing, right? So when you talk about marketing, what a space for us and others to step into and say, we can help be part of the solution to this, right? And we can celebrate the fact that we can be part of the solution to this, because it isn't just about providing the benefit of social housing. It's also providing that add-on multiplier effect of ensuring that you're countering that drag on the economy. You're giving access to people to, I think it was Anna this morning talked about meeting a nurse and trying to ask where are you going to live, right? Well, of course. We want people to work in our hospitals downtown in the center of the city. Of course we want that, right? But if you can't afford to live close by, how can we expect to continue to attract people into those roles, right? I think this is critically a challenge.
And this is where housing as part of the narrative, we have to change also that notion that we're just housing.
Yes.
No, we are part of the collective infrastructure. And whatever decision that we're making that has to be transit-oriented, nobody will question if you need a bridge or not. There will be debate and consultation and things like that. But at the end, you get billions of dollars going into a bridge or a road or critical sewage infrastructure, water infrastructure. Treating housing as infrastructure is also a big shift in the narrative. Sean and I had many conversations around it. The two portfolio together, it's $25 billion.
There you go.
Okay, so how we maximize that, how we leverage it, how we make use and make sure that everyone can benefit of it, because the future is not for OCH to build alone or to repair alone or to support alone. The future is all about the partners, the agencies. Some, have amazing programs in some areas, but will never get access to that type of capital. Like $25 billion, it's a lot of money. So how we make it available for those agencies to bloom, because growth is not just for our sector, it's for the agencies that they are supporting us. Because if we are growing, and take Ottawa community housing, we have about 12,000 children and youth, we have about 7,000 seniors. We cannot just have one single agency helping, all of the kids. We need many, and we need them to grow. So when they make a funding application, we need to support and make sure that they get, if they ask for 1 million, let's push for 2. And why? Because it will benefit more. And that's a type of capacity as a sector that we need to leverage, not only in Toronto or in Ottawa, but in Hamilton, in Sudbury, wherever you have a bigger provider, how that provider can enable others to bloom and grow.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I was, I use the term. No, we will. Trust me, we'll get to the disagree part in a moment. But no, I remember coming to ONPHA and sitting in my first board meeting, and they were asking questions about strategic planning, and I use the term social infrastructure. It's really not just to your point, no one's ever questioned why the heck are we tarring that same road again? Why do I got to wait for 45 minutes to get 2 minutes because they're tarring the road? No one questions it, right? But when you think about people who are needing supports through healthcare systems, who need to get better access to where they go to work and school every day, those are the things that I think people have forgotten. I mean, they became more evident during the COVID crisis. And I was just like, if we want things to get back to any semblance of good, you got to have things moving. And I always think about, if my mom had to pay 100% of the rent, which she did, but it was 80% because we lived in TCHC back in the day. I wouldn't be able to go to the movies like I did. You know what I mean? Because you'd have to pay rent and maybe get some food on the table, maybe get some clothes on your back. Those little small increments of extra, that's what keeps society going. That's why, when we go to the movies, I kept the guy that brought the colonels to the movie theater, popping the pop. It's like the wheel. The wheel keeps moving, right?
Everything's a big engine. Right?
And when the wheel stops, people get, you have crisis, right? So I think it's very important that we get to marketing ourselves in a way where people understand that. But I agree with simply, right? And why I'm saying simply was, recently ONPHA condensed the housing continuum map. So everybody's seen the continuum, homelessness to home ownership. In between there was all these little spigots in there that were all technically just community housing, but they just took it and they stretched it out, right? But I think that was done maybe unintentionally, but it felt intentional, because when you start going to this thing on the continuum or this thing, when we're talking about ourselves as community housing nonprofit providers, people are like, well, I help, I do support. Like, no, shrink it, make our message very simple and say, this is who we are, this is what we can cover, right? So.
And I like where you're going on the housing spectrum, and we're living the dream. Every day, and in terms of the complexity, and to keep it simple, is also the notion of attracting money and attracting funding. The fact that it's so divided on the continuum, it created also that false sense of division, and also it created an opportunity for the funders to make us competing against each other. Yes. And that's something that is real. Every time that we're looking at any type of funding, you hear about RFP, LOI, RFQ, standing offers. And that's my point about we should stop begging for money, because they need us. we are the delivery engines of the municipalities, of the provincial government, of the federal government, and also the private sector. Keep in mind, there's a lot of money right now floating in Canada, and thankfully, with banks, co-op, credit union movements, and others, that they're looking to land. But again, they are not sure to whom to go, because is that supportive housing or is that affordable housing? Is that affordability or market affordability? How about the missing middle right now, that you live in the core of Toronto, but you cannot afford the $4,000 a month net rent that you need over there, or same for Ottawa, but which is now at $2,500 to $3,000 a month, core downtown. So how we bring that forward where we don't create our own misery around the notion of having being different and unique, but now being all together and asking for the same. So that way, for the founders, we will be quite easy to deal with, and also like a no-brainer to do business with.
And you touched on something super important. I'm going to look at the crowd and I'm going to underscore it. So if you have a pen, write it down. They need us. Like, it's absolutely true. And I've been seeing a lot of, and this is where, you get new friends when there's opportunity, right? So when I've been looking around, I hear, a lot of private people wanting to get on projects, and then they have an accelerator, which is a nonprofit or a community housing provider, right? I think that thing should be flipped on its head, because at the end of the day, when that thing is built and we were housing people, they're going to walk away looking scot-free, and we're going to be operating I'd say the more challenging parts of the building, or whatever it is. Or actually, if it's not even challenging, we're just going to be left managing the building, because that's what we do very well. So they need us. And I think, I worry about getting into those types of deals, and maybe that's more of a question to you guys, is there's a lot of I'll call it the private public interest and the partnership interest, but I've seen some of these deals appear as accelerators. It's almost like, I want to do this, but in order to get more money from me, I need you, so you guys can get 4 floors, and I'm going to build 44. And then when I look around, it's like 40. The only 4 floors filled are ours. So what are your thoughts on that trap? I'd say it's a little bit of a delicate dance.
Yeah. Excuse me. It is. I mean, look, we're guilty of it in the past too, right?
Sure.
When we've done our revitalization work in Toronto community housing, a tremendous amount of that went into redevelopment and adding private market condominium, right? And more of that was built than social housing was built.
Yeah.
But the reality is we're talking about a 25, 30 year period where there was no other source of capital, right? So if you want to do anything, well, then you have to attract whatever is a reasonable source, right? Sure. And that was the reasonable source at the time. I think that time has changed, right? And I think that there is now access to different sources of capital. So you're right, we can start to flip it on its head. But I would tell you that Toronto community housing and Ottawa community housing are in a very different place than the average nonprofit housing provider in Ontario or across Canada, right? There's a tremendous number of small nonprofit providers that operate one building, right? And when you start talking about partnerships and development and building those kinds of capabilities, that's a large bridge to cross, right? And so I think that we have to look at that from a sector perspective and say, how can we leverage some of the knowledge and capabilities of some of the large providers to support? If you talked about the accelerator, a private operator going and working with a small nonprofit as that accelerator, why not one of the other big nonprofit operators, right? So, right, why can't we bring the skills and capability and land quite often, right, and access to capital and financing, but also still work with other small nonprofit providers? You talked about your Bumblebee program. That's amazing. We're trying to do something similar with partnerships with long-term care providers, and I think that there's just a tremendous opportunity right now if funders and the people that make zoning decisions and the people who have access to land and capital and financing are all in agreement that we want all of these things collectively, then that's a really unique opportunity for us as large players to say, okay, we'll do the hard work of making sure there's a tower or a couple of big mid-rises or what have you, but there's room for other people to play on this site or in this project, right? So let's attract that into the work that we're trying to do, or you come and attract us into the work you're trying to do, right? I think we would both be open to all those kinds of opportunities. Yeah,
and those partnership opportunities don't just live in the world of developing and building structures, right? I think if those partnerships happen through economies of scale, like if I think about things like technology. I remember the provincial government came to ONPHA looking for sector data during the middle of COVID. And we didn't have it because I was like, yeah, there's maybe a few people that have a couple of big systems out here. But to your point, there's some small providers out there that just haven't had the luxury or the benefit of utilizing technology. But I think about those types of things too. If we were to partner on a development, once that development's done, why don't we partner on getting the technology in there so that we have that rich sector data? Because I think that's the other part of our evolution is that we're going to have to really know our stuff, like all of it. So again, I've been around the large provider world. That was how I started, but I've been engaging with members who are smaller, and I find that there's a big disparity in understanding who they are when it comes to assets and funding and all these other parts of operational that are just being tracked in big systems. And you guys spit out with a report. It would take some nonprofits weeks, months, days and years. So I think about that from a partnership perspective is when we're lifting the boat here, it's not just about, leveraging the assets, building more and the infrastructure. It's about working smarter as a sector so that we can create a better story.
And there's a dimension that we're not talking. It's the risk element, right? Our risk tolerance or risk profile is different by the nature of who we are as an organization, because you can be a nonprofit with 500 homes or a nonprofit with 10 homes. Your risk profile won't be the same. You won't be, starting a new project if you only have 10 versus the 500. Now, interestingly, if you look at other sectors, think about banking. At the threshold of $100 million, they will do what it's called syndication. They want to share the risk amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. So if you borrow $500 million and you are a large construction firm in Canada, what they will do, they will call each other. They will say, hey, Royal Bank, hey, Scotia, hey, CIBC, are you kicking in for that loan that big construction company wants for that big project? And that's how they split the risk. In our sector, we're not there yet. It's called maturity as a sector. But you know what? We can start small and have 2 or 3 nonprofits or groups say, you know what? I can kick in maybe $50,000 here. You, $100,000 there. And together now, okay, we have that pool of money that can be that equity for a bigger build. But to your point, you raise a very good point. We don't have an inventory of who's who.
Yes.
Who's who and who's have what. Knowing in the sector that maybe, Stéphane, for the next 3 years, I'm kind of maxed out on the borrowing side, that's okay. And then you turn maybe to a Toronto community housing to say, no, maybe they are right now on the verge of borrowing. They have more flexibility. They sold a couple of buildings. But the same in the nonprofit and co-op worlds, where, there are some assets that they are at the end of the mortgage refinancing. That is an issue for now, but some are clear. So which one are clear? Which one have access to money? Which one will unlock their money and when by when? Because we need to plan growth. You cannot just, expect growth happening within just a year like that. We need as a sector to start planning our growth in our future and looking at the opportunities. So if you are nonprofits in rural areas of Ontario and you start looking at pulling the resources, that doesn't mean that you merge together, but it means that you look at the resources as the banks are not merging when they do that syndication, but they share the risk together. Is there a way that we can mitigate that? And also, I believe that we have a social responsibility as larger providers to give back to the sector. And we always make a point. I always see Toronto Community Housing sharing documents with other agencies, other groups, including OCH. We'll do the same with other agencies and with sector associations like ONPHA. So it's very important that that notion of collaboration keeps growing. But what I will say, we need a framework.
Yeah.
What is missing right now is we share, but we share what? What do you want? What do you need?
Exactly.
Sean, what do you want? What do you need? So if we start knowing what are the needs, we create that inventory, maybe a portal. I'm just saying maybe.
I was just hearing that. It was like, Stéphane's creating new work for me. It's okay.
So
it's recorded. I can get it all later.
Yeah, I tend to make people work. And no, just kidding.
I'm fine with it.
No, but if you start thinking about, okay, who's who in the sector, who needs what, when, by when, all of a sudden we can step in and help each other out. And that will help the sector to achieve its goal of growth and to be there for the tenants. Because keep in mind, in the background, whatever we do, whatever we talk today, there's someone in a house right now that is struggling.
Sure.
They are not meeting the ends. They wish the best for their kids to attend post-secondary education or find that first job. We need a lot of system of support there to achieve that. And it's not easy. That's the landlord.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to go back to what you said about risk, right? Because I think that that's a huge challenge for the sector as a whole. Like, we're the biggest organization in the sector, and development is just inherently, and capital renewal, renovation, construction, these are inherently risky things to do as any organization, right? So I can't even imagine how smaller organizations can take on that kind of risk. So I think that's a huge barrier to growth in our sector as a whole. It's one of the biggest challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis, and to try to navigate that within a municipal environment that is inherently risk averse, right? That's just a reality. Can be just an extraordinary challenge, right? And so what you talked about around sharing risk and how we go about some of those kind of projects, I would love to talk more about how we can do that sort of thing, because even as the biggest provider, it is still sometimes an overwhelming amount of risk, right? I think we both would have significant war stories to share about what we've run into in terms of development projects and capital renewal projects. We had one last year that we were doing capital renewal on a building, and we took down some cladding, and we found that the structural walls were not sound, right? So now all of a sudden we're not doing a recladding project anymore. We're spending millions more to
relocating, moving people.
You got it, right? So it's be careful, right? What you dig into. And yet I would never stand here and say that we shouldn't be doing those projects for fear of what we might find. Like, it's actually doubles how important it is to do it, because you better find those things. Because imagine what it could manifest into down the road if you don't find those problems. So I don't think, from a maturity of the sector point of view, I don't think we're great at risk management. I think, however, we live in an environment and a world where, because of the projects we do, it manifests itself on a daily basis, and we're very reactionary to it.
And I think, and I agree. I think, to your point of, you never know where you might find. You just got to go do it, because I think the longer you wait, sometimes it becomes a bigger issue, right?
But you have also some restrictions. It's important to recognize that housing, also some of the most vulnerable, also has its own set of constraints, because you cannot just move people like on a timely manner, because you need to plan ahead of time. And that's where, the life cycle of our buildings, the life cycle of our capital repair needs to be planned properly. Because if you have an apartment building with, I don't know, say 300 homes in the apartment, in the building, and you have about 20% of the population that they have mobility restriction, mental health and complexity and addiction problems, changing the waste pipe will be a challenge on its own, because you cannot just vacate the units and move people out. You need to plan ahead and making sure, and you have to synchronize the work and everything. And you may just start with the units at the corner of the building on the north side instead of doing the entire building. But instead of taking like 6 months, we will be accused of being inefficient, because it will take 5 years. Because we will be respectful of who we housed. So again, it's important to recognize the complexity that Sean raised. You cannot deploy a project the same way, especially when we talk about repair and maintenance, as in the traditional market, especially for the most vulnerable one. Having said that, in our case, it's about 10 to 12% of the population of OCH. The reminder, live, and today they went to work, likely they have 4 or 5 jobs, or now in the new portfolio, also more and more they are part of the missing middle.
Of course.
And that's a different type of population. Now we need to adapt also to those type of needs and be respectful. One thing that is important we're not talking about is the tenant support network and that system of support. When we talk about social innovation, social infrastructure and investment, you need a residence to be part of the solution. And we have a brand new building. It's called McKenzie in Ottawa, beautiful building, 260 homes that we built there. So when I look at the building itself, awesome. Now, when we go inside, we have had, different groups that they have, moved in, and some with very complex needs, and others that they are part of the missing middle. But what we've seen is the beauty of the interaction and intersections of the residents trying to help each other out. And where before we will have said, the residents that they will come with more complexities may need a different, maybe a set of apartment with a different agency. What we now are seeing is that some people are coming and working maybe as a nurse daytime and seeing that her neighbor or his neighbor is in need now, and that type of need is already something that they are addressing. Mixing the population has also another effect that I call it social innovation, but we are having access to other resources that we never really thought that they would be resources, and they are coming from the missing middle population moving into our portfolio and addressing the needs for the one that they are the most vulnerable. And the other way around, the one that they are the most vulnerable, for all of them, they are just amazing individuals that were at one point in their life amazing contributor to our society, but something happened. And they see that they can also aim towards a brighter future, and they need that system of support and tenant support also in the background to enable that. So for me, innovation, that social aspect is very important. And we have to start thinking about how can we enable it. I know that in Montreal, l'Office municipal d'habitation de Montréal, OMHM, they have what they call tenant agent. And they pay their residents to help other residents.
It's pretty cool.
For me, that's another economic driver. So they are generating, that type of continuity. And we have to start thinking about also how we can become social enterprise, nonprofit, or larger agency to employ the residents in their own future and, having access to programs in skills and trades or in nurse practitioner or PSW. And that could serve also the very own community that they are living in. So again, 100%. Other elements to look at.
But that's where we're talking about those other triggers, right? Because if it was just about opening doors and collecting rent, a lot of other people do that, and I guess they do it somewhat successfully. But when I look at the underpins of the housing crisis, the last thing, again, early days, I told you, they were talking supply, and then now all we're talking about is people. It's, there's a homelessness crisis, there's a missing middle crisis, it's an affordability crisis. It's because, people just can't afford how they live. There's rooms, there's places, there's spaces. Like I work in downtown Toronto, I turn around and I see, empty buildings. So we got to make sure that that stuff comes together properly. Question for the both of you. What's your biggest fear of our next arc? What are you worried about the most that might might keep us stuck as a sector?
I think it's an inherently challenging business model, right? Like if I approached you, let's say you worked at a bank and I approached you and said, hey, I got this amazing business for you, right? Every unit I build loses money. Yeah. And all the buildings I have are in critical condition and I've got no reserves to maintain them.
All right.
You want to invest, right? Like I think we have to understand that we're starting from a pretty challenging place in terms of the economic, financial sustainability of our organizations. Yeah. And that intertwines with the community development, community engagement within our neighborhoods as well, right? So the two things are you said it really well, like the mixed, when you go through that mixed approach, it's both more financially sustainable and a better approach to community development, right? So when you ask me what I think the biggest challenge is, it's this is not going to be smooth types of investment, right? It won't be just, you take this, we'll give you your 4% return and we'll develop a whole bunch of new housing for you and everybody will be tremendously happy. These are challenging developments to do, right? And so I think as we go through our growth, and as I said before, I'm going to make sure that we leverage that growth to address some of the big challenges that exist in our buildings and in our neighborhoods today. Those things come with difficulty, right? They come with, goes back to the risk management. We'll expose issues that we didn't even know about within some of our buildings and within some of our communities. And the last thing that I want is for 3 different levels of government or different layers of funding providers that have been brought to the table to all of a sudden be aghast and say, well, we didn't know what we were getting into here, right? Yeah. I think we got to be really honest about how challenging it is to develop community housing. And how challenging it is to operate it, right? Yeah. We're in a moment where I think a lot of people are glamorizing it, and that's awesome because it's going to help us attract a lot of attention and investment. But I want to keep it pretty real in terms of what it feels like to actually build and operate community housing. It's hard work, right? So I want to make sure that we hammer that home with everybody that we talk to.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day. It's like they said, I love being in the sector because that one time you have a win, it's like getting a punch against Mike Tyson in his heyday, because the rest of the time you're just getting punched.
I mean,
But
every
you
day
keep coming back for more.
when you get to move people in, like this is the best feeling in the world, right? Everybody, lots of folks have experienced that, right?
Yeah.
But that's just the first day, right? And there's so many other days after that. Right?
Yeah, but then you look around. There's a lot of other success stories, right? And I think you alluded to it at the very beginning, Stéphane. If we were to take an inventory of all the success stories that came out of community housing, people would be astounded. And I think that's also part of our marketing, is that this, how you described it, Sean, when you were like, invest in the lemon over here. I was like, oh man, it's kind of, that's a tough pitch. But
you weren't opening your checkbook.
Me personally, yes, but I kind of know what's going on. But it is a tough pitch. But when you get to the end of it, there's so much, I'll say, other success outside of just being somebody who gave you the keys and then you grew up, you moved out, and you went away, right? So I think that story is more to be told. Stéphane,
Just on the worriness side,
yeah,
you mentioned a couple of times crisis.
mm-hmm.
You mentioned momentum.
Mm-hmm.
If we are in a crisis, why are we still analyzing? Why are we still looking at different options? Why are we still waiting? The National Housing Strategy started in 2017.
Yep.
We had plenty of time to understand the needs, to deploy. And now is really the time. And for me, the concern is we're not acting like it's a crisis. Unfortunately, there were some hurricanes right now hitting some Caribbean islands. That's really sad for the islands. They are in crisis. What do you think happened? Everyone roll up their sleeves. They all go. They are rebuilding. They are thinking about reopening Kingston's airport, in Jamaica and other places. And us, we are in a crisis, sitting there and asking for the next RFP, maybe, that will come to build something when we need to be bold as a sector. We have a strong sector, we have strong voices, and we need to make sure for the deciders that they understand that, the delays right now, it's impacting not only themselves, but generations to come. And that's what is missing right now.
We're not even at the bottom, right? I mean, that's the other, we're still losing more affordable housing every year than we're building.
Yeah.
Right. And we're not keeping up with population growth. So that's the state that we're at, right? I can't remember who the speaker was this morning that said we lost 55. I think it was the Heather that said we lost 55,000 affordable homes. Right? We're not building 55,000 affordable homes.
Yeah.
No, you can't.
The rate of replacement is not there at all.
Not even close.
And to your point about the kids in the basement, think about also, right now we talk about communal living, about co-ownership. Many countries have already had systems in place that they were, like Sao Paulo in Brazil. If you own a house, the city and the state, they will allow you to sever your house. So a bedroom can be part of your home. And then you can build equity for your kids so that way they can move out eventually. We have to start rethinking the entire system if we want everyone to aspire to a brighter future. But living in a basement might not be the brighter future from a home ownership point of view.
Fair.
And if we look at community housing and nonprofit housing and any type of housing, it's very important that we start building a future that for the next generation is sustainable.
100%. And the basement is well lit and comfortable. I think that's why I should have made it a little bit more rustic. But
I'll get you some wood frame sofas. No caution.
I just wanted to put a reminder out to the group, and I saw a question that came through that was I think it was kind of answered through the discussion. But if you have a question, you can put it in through the app, and we'll try to get it answered right now. I'll give it a second.
While you're doing that, can I pick up on something? Because you talked about social enterprise a little bit, and that's an area that's pretty exciting too. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we're collectively as a sector, we are big spenders, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're talking, and I'll leave development aside because that's massive, but just capital renewal alone, we're spending $380 million a year, right? So a massive level, right? I suspect across the sector, we're well over $1 billion in terms of that kind of investment. We've started trying to target and identify where are the opportunities to leverage that financial investment to also support our communities simultaneously, right? So we've got, I think there's about 4 or 5 big nonprofit organizations that we're working with that are taking that up, right? And that are saying, we will commit to hiring tenants. We will commit to training them, providing them with trades apprenticeship opportunities, right? And we have to navigate the procurement side of it, right? So you ask some simple questions. Are they cost competitive with the others that provide that kind of service? Do they provide a quality service and product? Are we happy with what we're getting out of it? Right. The answer is yes. Great. Let's lean in, right? Let's use some of that financial power to support some of these existing social enterprise organizations. A big one here in Toronto building up is actually they're expanding now because of some of the commitments that we made, so that they can hire more tenants, they can train them, and they're committed to every project they do with us. They'll hire at least 50% of their staff as TCHC tenants, right?
Yeah.
Like, use the power we already have.
And when we were talking earlier about the loss of supply and everything else, and you're right, it's been happening over years. And then with the notion of things like acquisition and people getting, money to buy buildings back, like that's a product of, I'd say, they don't get the same landlording or tenant experience that they would anywhere else, right? I look around the city and I'm like, one of the biggest things that community and nonprofits provide are good, clean, safe homes. Like, the best we can, right? I've seen stuff on media where it's like, oh my goodness, like I have no idea why that hole's in someone's wall. But I know it's not a TCH building. I know it's not an OCH building, because you know what? We'd have to get all over that in 4 seconds. So there's a whole living experience piece where even though the stock has left us, I'm not sure if it's left for the better, but I'd say the buyer beware thing in our sector, when we think about things like acquisitions that are going to strengthen us, is that if you're bringing those things back into your portfolio, sure, you're going to have lots of tenants that you probably had 10 years ago coming back, but you got to utilize that to strengthen and grow. This is that whole leveraging the asset, building your portfolio up, right? We heard it from Anna this morning that BCH is a portfolio based approach. So it's kind of going along the lines of what you said. You guys are portfolios among yourselves. You guys can figure it out. But maybe out there, we got to start looking at, if I'm a nonprofit on 4 corners and we're all on each opposite corner, maybe we got to start working together to start getting that application in to come and build up our 4 corners here as a consortium of some sorts, because I don't want people to get left behind, nor do I want other people within other sectors to try to jump in and then again use us as an accelerator when we are the thing that is in demand. So I'm going to put you guys on the spot because we're running up against the clock, but if I want you to do that pitch again, but in the most saleable way, Sean and Stéphane. What's that one pitch? Because I might have to snip it and use it for my LinkedIn and show all my friends that, oh my gosh, I had no idea you worked in a sector that is so highly in demand and investable. So if we did that pitch in a little more of a rose-colored way, how would we make it sound?
I think I would say, I go back to what I started with, right? The housing system is changing around us, right? It is already changing. Every moment that we don't act, we're falling further behind. And that's evidenced by what we talked about in terms of losing more and more affordable housing. We can be a robust part of the solution, right? But if we're going to do that, we got to do it in a way that is financially sustainable and that builds up and develops our communities, right? We can't keep building and investing in more of the same from the past. We have to invest in a way that creates that sustainability for us.
And for me, it's really about two factors. We offer the best, and that would be a paradox. We are offering, in fact, the best return on investment because of the perpetuity of our stock. We are committing, okay, and we committed to affordability. Our properties, nonprofits, co-op, or municipally owned entities, they were there 30, 40 years ago, 100 years ago in some of our stock, and they will be there in 100 years. Okay, this is, try to now look at amortization and any type of internal rate of return and that type of financial ratios that you want. Nobody can project on 200 years old, assets class that you see in the marketplace. The other aspect is the social return. You have to, we are the only one that provide that social return, no matter what. And from our friends and colleagues in the nonprofit to everyone, each and every day, that plus element that you raise is about helping that senior to sign that lease agreement or to understand the clause that they won't be able to understand, and to be there because they live in isolation. They don't have families or support. So for me, the two factors are really about we never really look at it from a perpetuity point of view. We were there, we will be there. And the second element is really about that social return. We're there for the reasons because we care.
I love the perpetuity one. That's so great. Like, you can invest in voucher to help somebody, and in 20 years' time, inflation will eat that away.
Correct.
You can invest in new, true housing, and in 20 years' time, it'll be worth twice what it's worth today. Right? So
exactly,
it's a totally different mindset.
Yeah, and then the whole
we have copyrights on those elements for your pops.
Got it, no problem. And that's the whole. That's my thought around the concept of social infrastructure. As much as we're retarring roads, like you got to look at practical investments and ensuring that these public assets in a lot of senses are staying upright. And again, I remember back in the day, like it was a landmark decision on the State of Good Repair program at Toronto Community Housing, but I was like, there's a reason they were asking for $700 million in repairs. Mm-hmm. And actually it wasn't enough because for 30 years, we were so underfunded, right, at the time. So but to your point, investing in keeping those public assets and those social assets alive and running, they're going to not just last into the investment and the increase. They're also going to last in ensuring that every type of tenant that needs that type of housing is going to have it when they need it. So again, we think about legacy, time, years from now. I remember my building was there, I think just before I was born. It looks really cool now. You guys cladded it up all nice and everything else. But I know, 40 years from now when I drive it, up to Eglinton and Birchmount in Toronto here, my building is still there, and there's people that are benefiting in the same way my mother did as an immigrant, my mother did as a working professional, and people who needed supports in the building are getting, right? So I think it's that level of the pitch is that we're a good investment, not just because of the fact that, there's some losing parts of the investment. I think you can, as you get more, you can rebalance, you can start growing that part that will make money and all that kind of stuff, because I've seen you both do it in your portfolios, bringing on more of that below market stuff. But I think people can't ignore the fact that, investing in community housing is really investing in the success of people, in my brain.
And talking about success, let's celebrate successes. There's no small success.
No.
Anyone, and again, maybe that's the second page of your future portal. Let's post about those successes. We need to hear those stories that happen in Timmins or wherever across Ontario, and or in the Suluk or wherever. Our Indigenous colleagues and friends, when they have, that new site, let's celebrate, on behalf of the sector. And the same for Toronto Community Housing. When they fix a building that was in the news for the wrong reason, but they all did the great work to respond within 4 seconds to all of the pressure, let's celebrate about it.
100%.
So,
yeah. Well, gentlemen, I think we're coming close to the end of time here. And, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be. This is going to be the marketing gem that this sector needed to get us restarted in our next arc. So, Sean, Stéphane, I appreciate you both. I hope we can do this again in a couple of years to build off the arc and show how much progress we've made, because we are in fact in demand, and they absolutely need us to make this thing go. So thank you both for leading the charge, and we'll take care of more. And thank you for the homework too, Stéphane.
Thank you for the leadership.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you. We appreciate everything you guys do for us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.